Hi, I'm Alex Fraycon. You're listening to My Therapist and I, a podcast that isn't just about therapy, it is therapy. More specifically, my therapy. In this session, Dr. Steve asked me about my family, and as a result, we talk about my family for a bit, which, can always be a little bit awkward. So, hope you enjoy. Let me just hear what you sound like now.
Here, how's that?
Did you do that on purpose?
Yeah.
That was great. That was well done. Well played.
So this is my voice.
Yeah. So I wonder if I turn me down even more, because this way, there's two ways to giving you some podcast background. With this mixer, there are two ways it can export the audio. One is it can take both of our mics and combining it into one audio file, which is very easy. It's just one audio file, but I can't adjust the levels of my voice compared to yours. If I want to turn it up, I turn up the whole podcast, basically.
So you get the same.
Whereas it can do multiple audio files, and I can isolate each microphone and adjust it that way. However, that is just a huge pain.
Yeah, that sounds like too much editing.
So I'd much rather just figure out a sweet spot. So I think we're good like this.
Okay.
Yeah, I can tell already it sounds more full and stuff. So yeah.
Are we recording?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You got to give me a...
Why?
Because...
Do you feel like you got to put on your podcast version of yourself?
I just need to know when I can clear my throat or not.
Oh, yeah. No more throat clearing. So to anyone listening, sorry, I should change that. To everyone listening, Dr. Steve has been dealing with some, it sounds like just a long-term, what would you describe it as?
Just residual, upper respiratory residual.
Upper respiratory residuals. So I have very politely asked him to not make that horrible, awful sound into the microphone. And
I told Alex that's my voice.
Thank you, Dr. Steve, for your presence. How are you today?
I'm doing good.
That is good.
How about you?
I am doing okay. There's nothing bad, but I am admittedly, the last 10 days have been a lot. Just work, and then also just a lot of creativity is work, and that can be draining in its own right. And then a lot of emotional work too. Just it's all kind of compounded. So I am, I'm emotionally burnt out a little bit, or creatively burnt out. But aside from that, I'm good. It's sunny. It's not as cold as it was 2 weeks ago. Right. I went for a little walk today.
Nice.
So I can't complain there. It's okay with the throat clearing thing. It is what it is.
So I'm reminded that a couple of meetings ago, you shared some pretty deep stuff, kind of vulnerable stuff for you to share. I guess I'm wondering if there's been any feedback that you've gotten from that, or have people reach out to you, support you in any way, or?
I haven't. People have reached out, but no one acknowledged the heaviness of it. They were just hey, I really enjoyed the episode. This was great.
Oh, okay.
As opposed to hey, that particular subject, of your run-in with the law and your criminal past, that was interesting or something like that. Okay. Which, I can imagine there are people who feel uncomfortable about being hey, I was eavesdropped. I can imagine it sort of feels like they're eavesdropping a little bit, so maybe they're uncomfortable to address the specifics. However, I mean, I'm making a podcast, so it's it's all fair game. To all of you listening,
right.
You can reference things that are in this podcast. But yeah, It was. I remember when we released it, I felt like kind of anxious.
Yeah, I'm putting this out to the world.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
However, the tail end of that was a more positive feeling of like it sort of lessened the shame a little bit in a weird way, because it was kind of like, hey, I'm not ignoring that this happened, and I'm not ignoring part of this past. I'm talking about it, and through talking about it, kind of understanding that like I'm a work in progress and I'm a human and I'm dealing with stuff and I continue to deal with stuff. And I think just talking about it, to knowing that other people would hear it and the world didn't come crashing down.
Right.
Like that felt good, or that feels good.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, what's on your mind about the space that we're in here?
I don't know. Sometimes, I mean, I admittedly feel a little bit of pressure.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, like performance pressure. Like today I was like, oh God, I got to think of things to talk about with Dr. Steve.
Yeah.
And that's a unique aspect of what we got going on here. But it can be, just when I'm like, I have a lot going on, it just can be a little bit more challenging. But
well, I certainly have questions.
I bet. I also watch some past episodes and listen to them. It's like I talk a lot, and I can imagine people listening are like, "Okay, Alex, we get it. Let's hear from Dr. Steve."
No, I don't know that that's the forum for this. I don't know that that should be the format for what we're doing, because I think this is mimicking real life therapy where the clients talk more than the therapist.
And I was just going to ask, like, I imagine the majority of your sessions they are talking.
Yeah, people are giving me information. I don't do a lot. I don't do a lot of preaching. I don't do a lot of, hey, let me give you all the advice that you need, kind of a thing. It's more like listening so I can draw connections and ask questions. So,
yeah, aren't like therapists like you're not, the whole thing is like you're not supposed to give advice, right?
I mean, that's what I think.
Yeah,
but
I've heard that too.
I think there are a lot of therapists who do that, though.
Yeah, my therapist George makes it sound like it's a big no-no to give advice, but as like, sorry to clarify that, like it's almost like a rule as opposed to an opinion, but that might be his perspective. Like, this is what I believe.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, why don't you fire away if you got a question?
Well, I mean, the big thing for me, I don't know a lot about the family you grew up in, the family environment you grew up in, how, how that was, what was your experience of that? And
sure.
And I don't ask so much to like, oh, that's why Alex is the way he is. Like I don't do a lot of that, because I really believe parents are trying to do the best they can at a moment in time. But I think it's important to know what kind of relationship you have with your folks right now, or the people, your siblings. Is there cutoff? Is there over-involvement? And as you see it, and just those kinds of things are what kind of are of interest to me.
Yep. And where do I begin? The year was 1987. I was born. Yeah. I had it's hard to say what a normal childhood is, but my relationship with my family is pretty strong. We're pretty close. My parents no longer live in Minnesota, so there's that physical distance, but growing up, we were very we would do family trips together. We would have dinner together every night. In fact, my dad was really strict on that. Like, missing family dinner was a big deal, which as I grew up, I learned that wasn't, I always thought that was normal. But as I grew older and I went to college and stuff, and I talked to more and more people, they're like, yeah, I've never had meals with my parents. Like, we would just do our own thing. I was like, oh, that's interesting. But yeah, my parents are both, they're both very high achieving, successful, smart people. My dad is not from the United States. He is French, He was born in Casablanca
Mm.
and raised there up until his father passed away at a young age, and the family had to move to Paris.
Mm.
And I know that transition was very, very challenging for him because they kind of went from a situation where, they were comfortable and living well situated, and then they sort of just lost everything, and they had to start from scratch in Paris. And I bring that up because my dad would always tell stories of like as he was going through like the end of high school and college, he was also working to provide for his mom and his sister, and he'd tell me about all these kind of jobs he had, and one of them was he worked at a morgue for like a week.
Oh, wow.
And he tells this crazy story. The day he quit was they finished like cleaning a body, and the head guy like wiped off the table that the body was on, and then he took out bread and cheese, and he started eating lunch on the table. And my dad was like, "Okay, I can't do this. This is too weird." But yeah, so he met my mom in Los Angeles. They both went to Stanford where they met. And my mom is from Minnesota. She grew up here. And she's like equally ambitious, and she's really, she can be really intense in times. Like she's very assertive, and she's very proactive, and she's very intimidating. And I'll just use the term, she's pretty badass in terms of like, she came up in kind of the 80s when women, were not really, and arguably still aren't in a lot of like positions of kind of power management, and she worked her way up to be a female executive. And so yeah, there's a very assertive dynamic in my upbringing. Like I had two very strong-willed, extroverted parents. And yeah, I was my brother, I have an older brother. He and I are pretty close too. We're very different in a lot of ways, as are most brothers. But yeah, he works with my mom, so I see him pretty frequently. Just because I sometimes squat out of their office, do some work there, so I see my brother quite frequently. Yeah, that's kind of my family. Got a mom and a dad and a brother. And I know that my dad has stumbled across this podcast, so that's like what's running through my head right now. It's like, as I'm saying things, I'm like, okay, is he going to get pissed off by this? Is he going to get pissed off by this? He is a very private man. And I think the idea of me saying that on a podcast is probably going to be challenging for him. But yeah, that's what you get for having kids, Dad, if you're listening.
Maybe not just kids, but having Alex.
Having Alex, yeah. Yeah. Hindsight's 2020, I suppose. But yeah, what else? What can I tell you about my family and my childhood and that stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not like I've got
you just want to
deep dark. I just need a lay of the land, you've provided a good kind of cursory picture of who the major players are in your life, and that's important. The kind of relationship, how close you are to them. Yeah,
and then this is obviously a topic that I've talked about a lot throughout therapy, and like what things I've struggled with and how they relate to my childhood, and what needs were met as a child and what needs were not met, and things like that. And I think one thing there are a couple of things that are probably learned habits that I'm working on. And one is this idea of like, I don't know if this is a well-used phrase, but like human doing versus human being.
Yep, I've heard it before.
Yep. So that's something that I try to put emphasis on, right? Because I have constantly, daily, I think I mentioned this in the first episode, but like every day I am thinking about what I could be doing more and what I have yet to do and why what I am doing is not good enough. And that is a very persistent, angry voice, So that's something that
So my worth being connected to my productivity, my products, deliverables, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Growing up, I heard a lot of stop being lazy. You're being lazy. And maybe I was being lazy. I don't know. But it's very hard for me to sit around and do nothing. Because even to this day, I hear that voice of like, you need to be doing something. You can't do nothing. I get really uncomfortable when I'm sitting around doing nothing because I'm like, oh God, you're just wasting time.
You wouldn't be a good sunbather.
Well, that's the great irony is like, if I can leave my environment and go somewhere else, I can just be like, oh, I have an excuse now.
I'm on vacation.
I'm on vacation. And so I can just lounge for an entire day. But here in my home town, it's specifically, I've noticed too in Minneapolis, like if I'm physically in this state, I just am kind of a little bit more on edge. Whereas like I spent a little bit of time after college in New York City and I loved it because I was like, oh, I'm in this new area. I can be a different version of myself. I can kind of go with however I want to, go with the flow sort of a thing. But yeah. So there's that. And then also too, growing up, my father's a very passionate man, very emotional. And those swings in emotions could be very drastic. And I picked up a pretty nasty temper as such. And that's something that therapy has like really, really helped me with because I used to be like it's something I still struggle with is just like I can be a very angry person sometimes.
Who do you save that for?
That's what's, George's telling me, he's like, dude, you should just get a punching bag, like get a boxing bag. But I do not have very great mechanisms for, it's funny you bring this up because I just, so I meet with a real life therapist as a kind of one of safety.
I'm the fake guy.
Here's the fake therapist, the fake. Well, you're kind of like a doctor,
Almost real.
So I was meeting with him just yesterday and I was feeling angry and I had to stop and be like, George, I'm just pissed. You're pissing me off right now. And he started smiling. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, I just find you annoying. And then we went into it and I kept being like, okay, I know this is just because I'm frustrated. And George was like, Alex, it's okay to tell me that I'm pissing you off right now because it lets me know that you're expressing your emotion and how you're feeling and you're being true to that. And we talked about like, okay, there is anger built up. Like, what are some ways to get rid of it? I don't really. Exercise is a good, healthy way of dealing with it, but I haven't been exercising lately. So I don't, lash out at anyone, but, and I haven't for a very long time. And a part of me, sometimes I think like, where does all of that anger go? Like, and maybe that's creativity is helpful in that regard. A lot of it has dissipated through therapy. And then also I probably should have told you this at the beginning. I'm on Prozac. I take a very, very small dose of it. I take like 10 milligrams a day, which I remember telling my doctor that's the dosage I want. She's like, well, we typically save this for like the elderly. Is it going to help you? And I was like, yeah, I just want a little.
Take the edge off.
Yeah, and it is very helpful. Like I'm happy with the dosage I'm at. I have, it's just enough to not make me like complacent or feel apathetic about stuff, but also, like you said, takes the edge off a bit.
So it's interesting that one of the recommendations you received was about getting a punching bag. What are your thoughts about that? As far as using that punching bag, not for an aerobic workout, but to quote unquote get the anger out.
Yeah. I think that came from the tail end of me being like, I feel, and I don't know if this is just how I'm wired as a human and as a male species, but I feel a lot of like desire to like run and like push things and like that's why I love hockey and playing hockey. Not like the physical aspect of it, not the idea of like fighting someone, but the idea of like kind of battling a bit. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. A part of me is on guard now because I'm like, is Dr. Steve insinuating that I have anger management issues?
I'm more trying to figure out what your thoughts are about anger, because I think it's a common belief that people need to find a way to express their anger, to reduce the amount, almost like there's a container inside my body. Like I've got a container of anger, and I need to let that cap off and drain it out every now and then. It's going to build up again. And I'm not so sure that I fall into the believing that that's the way we are.
Yeah.
I think anger is like a lot of other emotions. Sometimes we even talk about anger being a secondary emotion, right? That something happens before I get angry, like sad, hurt, lonely, scared. Those are the big four for me. That when I'm angry, there's usually something connected to those four. One of those four: sad, hurt, lonely, scared, and oftentimes it comes out as anger. And the challenge for when it's coming out as anger is to help people identify one of these four: sad, hurt, lonely, scared, and have them talk about sad, hurt, lonely, scared as opposed to the anger. The anger pushes people away. So when I'm angry and you and I are angry with each other, that creates distance. But when I approach you and say, "Hey, Alex, this thing you did, really it made me sad, or it landed on me this way, or I was hurt by the things that you said," that is an invitation for conversation and connection.
Yeah.
But when you stay at the anger, so when people are staying with the anger, you want them to go deeper. Sometimes when all they can do is kind of wallow in their sadness and their hurt, you want them to maybe get the anger out and then kind of move past it. So
that makes perfect sense. And going back to your original question, how did it make me feel to hear that? A part of me was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. That would make me feel better to punch a thing and exercise and really let my anger out. It was like, oh, that would be a cathartic thing.
Right.
But also hearing what you just said, I 100% agree.
Mm.
Anger is typically, from what I understand and what I believe, anger is usually a result of like some kind of boundary being repeatedly crossed, whether it's like, like you said, I'm feeling sad and I continue to, I feel sad and feel sad and feel sad. And I feel like there are external forces causing me. I want to like push back at that sadness and fight back, so to speak. And to your point too, it's like when you want to talk to someone, saying if someone does you wrong, you think that they've done you wrong and you respond with anger, that's just conflict. Whereas if you respond with the truth of the matter, which is, I feel sad, I'm hurt, someone, is going to more often be like, oh, well, I didn't mean to do that. Like, let's talk about it.
Right. One invites connection. The other invites disconnection.
Yeah. I did not grow up in an environment where people really talked about their emotions or their feelings. Mm-hmm. I can't think of a time. And that's something, that's probably getting to like some kind of nerve, that's like a sensitive subject, I guess, for me. Because it's definitely, like when I think back, I think about this a lot. There were many times where as a kid, I had to figure out like, okay, have I done something wrong? Because I'm being met with a lot of anger right now. And all I was trying to do was explain how I feel. And I was met with anger. And I think that sort of taught me in a way to lead with anger and lead with confrontation. Which has been a hell of a trip breaking that barrier down. But I've made a lot of progress, and I'm happy about the progress I've made. But I still feel scared and in shame talking about anger. This is a subject where there's a voice in my head that's like, okay, dude, maybe we don't get into this for the podcast. Because there's fear and there's real shame. Anger is something that, I carry some shame about.
Sometimes feelings we have around feeling states like anger, they touch on family rules. The family I grew up in, no crying. Like the strong British, keep your stiff upper lip kind of cultural mentality. One of the rules when we were roughhousing with my dad was, if he ever said, "Do I hear tears? Do I hear tears?" Like, all of us kids knew that if somebody was crying, they got hurt in roughhousing, to escort that kid out.
Wow.
So the party could still go on,
Mm-hmm.
And so keeping that party atmosphere was really important. So it taught us a lot about when you're hurting, when you're in pain, don't say anything about that. The party stops when you're, and we're not playing anymore. So you didn't want to ruin it for everybody else. So you'd leave, or your siblings would escort you out. And so that was a family rule about, we don't want to hear about your pain. We don't want to hear about your sadness, your hurt.
Mine was, you really just weren't allowed to, for your emotions to trump your brain. Like you had to be smart and do the smart thing. And if you didn't do the smart thing, you were wrong and you needed to be told you were wrong, as opposed to being like, it's really frustrating because like,
well, it sounds like there was a currency, right? The currency, the more valued currency was intellect and cognitions, thoughts, instead of the feelings. Am I understanding that right?
And I think that, and the more I've thought about it, a lot of it was just because like, I don't think, a lot of this is family of origin in terms of like, it's generational, and you use the tools you have. And I think in my household, my parents probably weren't given an opportunity to develop those tools. So it's like they can't develop those tools in someone else if they don't have them themselves. So growing up, it was just like, yeah. And I was like a really emotional kid. Like I was all over the place, really rambunctious. I had a ton of emotional energy, and I'm sure it was really draining, but it was often met with like, stop it, end it, no more emotions, think, behave.
Override.
Yeah. Yes. Override. And I think the times that were the most challenging for me were like, if there was an argument, it was like, okay, child is wrong, parent is right. Parent will not talk to the child or acknowledge the child until the child admits that they were wrong and apologizes. And that's a really strange environment to grow up in, because like there are times where you're like, maybe you're just being a kid and you don't know any better because you're a kid. However, you're experiencing these, like this punishment of like, oh, I've done something really wrong here. I don't know what it is because I don't know what's going on because I'm 6 years old, but I know that my parents aren't talking to me, for 2 days until I say I'm sorry. And I don't know what I'm saying sorry for. And my gut tells me I shouldn't be saying sorry, but I have to if I want to
get in their good graces.
Yeah,
again.
If and I'm in this house 24/7.
Right.
I can't just be isolated forever. Yeah.
So when you think about that, is that something you've gone back to your folks and said, "Hey, I've come to realize there was this family rule growing up, and I'm not sure, did I get it? How did you guys experience it? I'm not sure that this is something I want to replicate when I have my own kids." Or have you had those kind of conversations?
It's very, very, very challenging. And it has to be put very delicately.
To have a conversation like that?
Yes, because it's a bit easier with my mom, but both of my parents are very, very sensitive to the idea of being told that they've done something wrong, or the implication that they've done something wrong.
Or having that put out on the internet.
Right? Yeah. Which like...
Sorry, Mom and Dad.
Yeah, that's a joke. He's joking. The joke is we're all humans doing the best that we can. But yeah, so like I daydream about how awesome it would be to just go up to him and be like, "Hey, like here's what I've been thinking about," and then be like, "Oh, like, hey, I get it. Like it's totally fine to think that." And this was our experience, but we get why you experienced it that way. That sucks. Like, let's talk about it. As opposed to like, well, that's not how I remember it, or like, And
I'm a big proponent of people going to their parents, especially if your folks are alive. And if you have questions about the way that you were brought up, or family environment, or just the rules and boundaries, to going back to them and saying, "Hey, I want to talk about something. It has to do with, how I was raised in the environment, which was, I'm not mad at you. I mean, maybe you are mad. Maybe you or somebody else in that situation might be mad at their folks, but I think it's important to be able to go back to your folks. It's all part of the developmental process of having a relationship, an adult-to-adult relationship with your parents, where we can talk about anything. You know, there's usually this power dynamic where your parents are above you and you're kind of below them. You're always the kid. But then something can shift over time where you parents no longer see you as the youngest born or the middle child or whatever. And they
How do you recommend doing that in instances where it's like, because like the quote, the line that I'm running through my head, if I were to have a conversation, would be like, how dare you insinuate, like, how could you say that? You know, like, how do you encourage people to talk to their parents if they're worried that it's going to be a very emotionally charged conversation?
I think most people are going to have an emotionally charged conversation. And let's face it, there's people out there who did not get a great start from their folks. And you know, notwithstanding what I said earlier about parents are trying to do the best that they can with the resources they have, there are some things, you know, like sometimes our parents have done things that are wrong to us. We live in an environment now where you don't to provide or to administer corporal punishment to your kids is not necessarily the norm in every household, right? And so, you know, so that's something that maybe I'm trying not to do, and yet my parents did it, and so I might have a conversation like, what were your thoughts about administering corporal punishment? Like, how did you and mom get there? How did you and dad get to that place where that was okay? Because I'm in a very different spot right now. Are you saying we did a lousy job? No, I'm not saying. I want to talk to you about what it was like to be parents. I mean, you had young kids. You didn't have a manual either, and I haven't got a manual, and I'm trying to figure this out. How did you make the decisions that you made? But sometimes those conversations you need to really front load. You really need to say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about the home I grew up in and what it was like for you guys to be parents, and maybe I was a difficult kid, but there's these things, these questions that I have, and I think those conversations help your parents become more human than these power mongers in your life, or people who kind of kept you down or determined how you're going to end up being. You can, if your parents are still alive and if they're open to having a conversation, you can adjust. You can adjust the way that you relate to your parents. You don't have to be in the kid position all the time.
I have had pretty adult conversations with my parents, and, you know, we've tackled a lot of varying subjects with, like, you know, frankness, and I think we're on the same level playing field in terms of, like, I don't think my parents look at me as a kid. I think, however, I personally am not in a good enough place to go and approach them and have a frank conversation. I personally am still really pissed off about a lot of stuff. So one of those being that,
you do
like,
need that punching bag then.
Yeah, and like, I think what frustrates me the most is I have to sit down and talk to a licensed professional about how I could consider having a conversation with my parents to keep them from making it about me, yelling at me. You know, like, I have tried to sit down with family members and be like, hey, here's how I'm feeling. You know, I still love you. We're still family, but this upset me, and here's why. And it turned around being like, I can't believe, Alex, you're feeling this. You're weak. And they stormed off. And, you know, we were in a public place. Like, it sucks to go through that experience in order to have an honest conversation about feelings. Like, I wish I could just be like, hey, these are my feelings. You don't need to, these aren't here to offend you. This doesn't mean you're a bad person, but they exist. And I think it's because of some things that have happened. Can we talk about it?
Yeah.
That would be so lovely.
Yeah.
But instead it's like, okay, I have to write a 100-page manual and be like, step 1, I have to use the phrase, I love you. Step 2, I have to follow that up by being like, you're doing a great job. Step 3, I have to start, you know, like, it just feels like so
you
much
don't want
effort.
to you don't want to have to front load it that much.
Maybe it's the amount of front loading frustrates me, and it's equal parts that, and maybe I'm just also afraid of going with emotions and being yelled at. And, you know, there have been times where I would, again, like, I have a conversation about my feelings. If it goes the wrong way, my dad won't talk to me for a week. Like, that's weird. It's uncomfortable to go through that.
Right. But even being able to predict some of that, like, hey, Dad, I know, like, if we're going to have this conversation, you're going to be tempted to run off for a week if you get hurt by what I have to say. My intention is not to hurt you. I just want to have a conversation. I'm trying to figure my life out, and you and Mom are huge parts of my life. And so I just want to talk about that. And if you have parents from a generation where they didn't talk about feelings, or there are cultural imperatives that we don't talk about this, men don't show weakness, whatever the cultural imperative might be, it's, and if you're bucking the system, you're swimming up a cultural stream, and so you will be challenging some of the rules that they've lived their life by, and some of the rules that they feel have contributed to their success in this world. And so just opening that conversation, saying, I would like to have a different kind of conversation than we've agreed to have. We have this tacit agreement as a family that we're not going to talk about feelings, but I'm going to buck that. Yeah. I'm going to swim upstream, and I want to talk about it because that's important for me. I'm starting a new life. I'm at a place where I might be a dad someday soon, and
someday soon, Haley. I don't know.
I want to make sure that I'm capable of, more emotional expression than what I felt was allowed in our family.
Maybe I just send you, Steve. You can play the role of Alex. And you guys can tackle that and let me know how it goes. Is that something?
Okay, but then you risk getting written out of the will. They're like, yeah, Steve nailed it.
The son we always
have. I do speak a little French too, so.
Yeah. I think.
Un petit peu.
Un petit peu. That means a little bit to everyone listening. Yeah. And again, like I said, I have to be frank and honest. I even now, like, I can feel the anger and resentment bubbling up a little bit. I need to get into a better place of, like, I feel so cliche, and sometimes I'm embarrassed to even go through this publicly, which is like, oh, classic person with unresolved conflict with their parents. Like, if there isn't, there's probably a book written about that. There's thousands and thousands of books written about that. Yep. But
a lot of those books, the central premise is you've had toxic parents and you need to get them out of your life. And I think that's way overplayed.
Yeah, that's just, I love my parents and I love having them in my life, and all of the good I have, comes from them.
Sure.
And I have a little bit of bad. And that's what I want to tell them too. It's like, guys, you've given me so much good. Would it kill you to just admit that you gave me a little bit of bad too? Right? Like, let's say it's 95% good and it's 5% bad, but the, like, pure just denial and like, you can't even touch that 5%. It's just going to send them to the moon.
So if they were able to come to you and say, we'd like to know the bad.
Yeah.
We want to know what are the things that you've told us you love us. You told us that we provided a good start, et cetera, et cetera. Where did we come up short?
Yeah.
Would you want them to introduce that conversation to you?
If 100%. And because then I could be like, I'll tell you, and just remember, this is like, grand scheme of things, I'm really happy and I love having you guys in my life, and you're a source of strength. When I have issues, the first person I call are my parents. They always pick up the phone. My mom's really busy, so sometimes she'll send me an email and she'll be like, schedule a call with me, which, like, that's a weird thing to be like, Mom, I'm having a problem. She'll be like, okay, get back, talk to my receptionist.
Have your people.
Yeah.
Contact my people.
But yeah, I would love that, because I think at the very least what I'm looking for is the ability to be like, hey guys, this was my experience. It was really hard for me. Could you just at the very least acknowledge that A, it happened, and B, we still love each other, but like it would mean a lot if you were just to say, hey, yeah, we kind of messed that up. We're sorry. That would go a long way. But yeah, which gives me perspective too. Like, when I become a parent, I'm probably going to have this aha moment where I'm like, oh, it all makes sense.
That's why they beat me.
No. And like, again, my parents did not beat me. Which, that's a serious thing. I shouldn't even be laughing. Like, if obviously that physical abuse is no joke, and that exists in family systems. But it would just be nice to see them vulnerable and just because to me that's like that's the highest level of confidence, to be like, this is a fault, I messed this up, but I still know that I'm a good person and I still have worth and value, and I'm adult enough to tell my child this, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna hit pause here.
Okay.
So maybe this will be a part 2. What do you think about that?
Sure. Let's do what we need to do.
Do what we need to do. But the moral of the story is, people, if you have problems with your parents, contact Dr. Steve. He will talk to them for you for a flat fee. It's a per parent service. I don't know. Maybe there's a 2-for-1 deal.
Groupon.
Does that still exist? I don't think it does.
I think so. I have an app on my phone. Probably
you
tells
do?
you how old I am, but
you have a Groupon app?
yeah,
I'm pretty sure they went under.
Look at it.
Okay, no. I wonder if, my apologies to Groupon if you're still a company. But maybe talk to your marketing manager, because clearly there's some of us who don't know if you're still around. But yeah, there's probably a lot to unpack, and we'll keep digging like we always do. So thank you, Dr. Steve.
All right.
And I will catch everyone here later.